All right, hello everyone. My name is Rick Howard and I am the Chief Security Officer for Palo Alto Networks. I'm going to talk about this topic. Operation Olympic Games is the Tom Clancy spy story that changed everything. This is a presentation that I gave at the RSA conference in 2014, and I love this story. So this is really, Olympic Games is really the story of Stuxnet, the Stuxnet attacks that happened between the summer of 2010 and the fall of 2011. It is covered in great detail, by this guy, David Sanger, in his most excellent book, Confront and Conceal. And it is really about the joint operation between the U.S. and Israel that they codenamed Olympic Games, designed to degrade and destroy the uranium enrichment capabilities of Iran. So the reason I like this story is that it's a great story, all right? So we're going to tell that. It's like almost a spy story. Okay, it has impact to our own cybersecurity community with the aftermath, and it has impact to our political world. And in the story itself, we're seeing targeted reconnaissance, hacking, sabotage, and assassination. I mean, this could be almost a Jason Bourne movie. But it is really about cyber warfare and how now it is on the table. And up to this point, up before Stuxnet and Olympic Games, cyber warfare was just a theory. Okay, and there's been a lot of books written on the subject on the possibilities of cyber warfare. Okay, and many pundits writing about it in their blogs and in the newspapers. Okay, but we really have not seen a real incident of it until Stuxnet came around in that summer. It started in the summer of 2010. That's when we first got the inklings of it. An antivirus company called Virus Blockada. And if I was going to build my own antivirus company, I'm definitely going to call it Virus Blockada because that's just, that's too funny. All right. They noticed Stuxnet in the wild, and they noticed that it was going after mostly Iranian targets. So, and Stuxnet is the piece of malcode that we're talking about here, and is really the first instance of the cyber war that we meant. But really, if you go back in the timeline, the planning and coordination that had to happen between the U.S. and Israel and our own militaries and intelligence outfits really started way back in 2006 before we actually saw the aftermath of Stuxnet. And we know that the attackers probably were doing things independently for a long time. The U.S. and Israel were working on interesting things, and the attackers were in motion. We've seen evidence of it between those time frames. David Sanger published his book in sometime in 2012, and it really does highlight the political implications of this attack, right? And the idea that the U.S. and Israel work together to go after the Iranian nuclear facilities in something called Olympic Games. The whole purpose of it was to delay and degrade the operation, right? Because the problem was the West thinks that Iran is building a nuclear bomb, and they want to try to stop that. And the Iranians said they were just trying to increase their power generation within their own country. But really, David Sanger's book, Confront and Conceal, is about the foreign policy implications of using a cyber weapon to destroy critical infrastructure in a country neither Israel or the U.S. was at war with. So this isn't our story. I didn't make all this stuff up. There's been a lot of great journalists covering this story over time. Guys like Michael Gross from Vanity Fair, David Sanger from the New York Times, and Kim Zetter from Wired are some of the journalists that covered it. But there have been security researchers that have pulled apart the malicious code Stuxnet to understand how it works. The guys at Symantec, the Institute for Science and International Security, the guys at Virus Blockada, the Laboratory of Cryptology and System Security out of Turkey, iDefense, Kaspersky, Ralph Langer, all have been instrumental in trying to understand how this thing came together. So I'm just retelling the story. These guys are the ones that put it together. So the story is, like I said, this guy, Sergey Olesin, works for Virus Blockada. He notices Stuxnet in the wild, and he notices that Stuxnet is targeting the old SCADA systems, the supervisory control and data acquisition systems that we've been worried about. Folks like me have been worried about in the security industry for a long time as being prone to cyber attack. He sees Stuxnet going after those kinds of systems, right? And these the reason we're worried about these things, these SCADA systems, these supervisory control and data acquisition systems, is that they are all over controlling everything in our environments. The water, the heat, the power, and all those controls are out there. And we've known for years that those systems are not that secure. So when you look at the work that Symantec did in discovering Stuxnet and its impact, you see in color shades in their map where they saw Stuxnet infiltrating various networks. The darker the shade of the color in red is the more compact the infection rate. So that really dark red circle is where Stuxnet was mostly in the world. And it turns out that that is where the Iranian uranium enrichment program is at a site called Natanz, a nuclear site that they are worried about. Okay, this is Iran trying to build their own power system in their country, and like I said, the U.S., Israel, and the West think they're trying to build an atomic bomb. But we have to go further back in the story to understand how we got to that point. It really started back in 1976 when this guy, A.Q. Khan, he's an old metallurgist working for the old Dutch, and he steals the design of the first generation centrifuge. The centrifuge is used for making enriched uranium, and he runs off to Pakistan and starts a black market business selling that technology to countries that want to pay for it. The way the centrifuge works is, in order to get enriched uranium, what you do is you stick gas into the centrifuge and spin it really, really fast. The heavier atoms collect to the outside, and the analysts collect that stuff. You need, those heavier atoms are the enriched uranium. You need enriched uranium to do nuclear power, and you need enriched uranium to make a nuclear bomb. We're pretty sure that according to a bunch of different sources, that Mr. Khan sold that technology to Muammar al-Gaddafi of Libya in the early 1990s. Okay, and back in those days, we convinced Mr. Gaddafi to cease and desist his nuclear power program, and so he dismantled that program, and there's a good chance that we got some of those centrifuges for study, and some of them ended up at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. So that's where we got them to study. Okay, so now independently, now we're looking, both countries, the U.S. and Israel, are looking to find vulnerabilities in these P1 centrifuges for some future attack. No specific mission at this point, but looking at how we might infect those things for some future mission. In fact, the Israelis built a special base out in the Negev desert just to do that specific task. Highly secret, no one knew about it for a long time. So in 2006 now, that story starts to come together. The military in the U.S. Under this guy, General James Cartwright, now retired, and one of the primary sources to David Sanger in his book, he decides that the military needs to start an offensive cyber warfare operation command. And the intelligence groups under the National Intelligence Director, Mike McConnell, around the same time think the same thing, that there needs to be some group that handles offensive operations to do some sort of cyber attack for some future mission. Later on, in 2010, the U.S. Cyber Command is formed, right, and to do that mission specifically. But back then, that's when it all first started. So in 2006, these guys are planning and looking. These are the ones looking for vulnerabilities in those P1 centrifuges. And then in 2006, President Bush is the president. He's on his second term, and he needs some options dealing with Iran. He's very concerned about nuclear proliferation. Okay, he's doing routine meetings with his Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and his National Security Advisor Stephen Hadley, and they're talking about what is to be done about this problem, because the options are not very good. You can either bomb the country or go to war with them, okay, and that's not really good. And he's already at war with two other Middle East countries, Iraq and Afghanistan, and he needed some middle ground in order to pressure the Iranians to back off on their nuclear program, and he wasn't getting a lot of answers. And this is where Olympic Games came in to fill the void. It was a two-phase plan, according to David Sanger in his book. The first phase was the beacon phase. They had to get a piece of malicious code into the Natanz power plant that wasn't connected to the internet, okay, to a recon of the mission, okay, to understand what they have so they can look for vulnerabilities and see how they might exploit them in the future. Okay, so that's what they did. They had to recon it and then get all in it. And by the way, once you finish the recon, you had to get that information back out so that we can analyze it and make the next piece of the software that would work. Phase 2, which was the bug, where we'd actually delay and degrade the operation at Natanz. And the idea here is that we didn't want to blow stuff up. We didn't want to cripple it. We wanted the technicians to think it was their fault that things were failing, and it wasn't some malicious code inside their organization. So the idea was to cause confusion, not destruction. So those are the plan. That was the plan. 2 phases: a beacon to go recon, get the data out, and then phase 2 to run the bug in there to cause confusion and delay inside the plant. Some people think that phase 1, the beacon, was really Flame. Even there's a piece of malcode called Flame that Kaspersky's talks about in some of their blogs. That there's no consensus on that, but a lot of people think that Flame was the beacon. But pretty sure everybody in the community believes that Stuxnet was the bug. In fact, we started seeing early versions of Stuxnet as way back as 2005. Remember, the Stuxnet attacks happened in 2010, but some security researchers say that there's been remnants of Stuxnet, beginnings of it, way back in the middle of 2005. Remember that Mike McConnell and General Cartwright built their programs of offensive operations in 2006, so there was somebody working on this kind of code way before those guys even got an idea that there should be some sort of offensive capability in both the military systems and the intelligence systems. Flame starts to pop up sometime after that as the beacon, and then President Bush is the one that authorizes Olympic Games about a year after that. And then Stuxnet happens in 2009, starts to see the first real attack going against Natanz in 2009. Okay, discovered in late 2000 or midsummer 2010. And then aftermath, there's the next version of Flame, if you're following that at all. Some security researchers think that Dooku, another piece of malcode, is the next version of Flame. So here we are in 2007. President Bush is worried about this problem, the uranium enrichment facility at Natanz, all right, and he signs the order to undermine the electrical systems at Natanz at the beginning of 2008. Okay, from then on, that's when the Olympic Games happened, from the beginning of 2008 until it was discovered by virus Blockada in 2010. So also going on at the same time, the Idaho National Laboratory, okay, and which is, by the way, that's not a government organization, that is a contractor organization that works for the government, and Siemens decide they're going to get together and look for vulnerabilities in SCADA systems, okay. Siemens is the largest, probably the largest producer of SCADA systems on the planet, right, and there's a good chance, and they also sold products and services to the Iranians. They had contractors working on site, and their equipment was on site. The Idaho National Laboratory, like I said, is a contractor, and their mission is to ensure the nation's energy security with safe, competitive, and sustainable energy systems and unique national homeland security capabilities. Like I said, this is a government contractor and not the government, right? So their mission obviously would follow looking at the P1 centrifuges that we stole from Muammar Gaddafi when we told him to shut his program down. So this is speculation, but there's a good chance that the Idaho National Laboratory had some of these centrifuges in their labs. All right, they produced the reports at a conference called thecontrolglobal.com in the middle of 2008. Okay, and suspiciously, that is when all these attacks were going on. So it's interesting to note that those two things were going on at the same time. So Flame starts, the beacon starts to go after Natanz in the beginning of 2008 and all the way through 2010. Again, speculation, that's when it happened. And then Stuxnet goes in during that time frame to cause the delay and degrade operation. Remembering that Natanz has no internet operation, no connection. So how did they get it in there? There's lots of speculation about how those two pieces of software were installed. Many people think that the old traditional dump a bunch of USB sticks with the malcode on it around engineers and workers in the facility and have them unwittingly install it into the plant once they got in there. Some people think that Siemens may have been involved. Either their own contractors' machines were compromised without them knowing it, or they were accomplices to the attack. So that's how they got it in, as those contractors move in and out of the facility. That's how that software might have been implemented. A third option, or a third theory, is that it came into the supply chain. There are a number of third-party systems that supplied equipment and services to Natanz, and that may be a way to slip the software in there. There's others that you might have your own theory about how we got in there. It's most likely a combination of all three of these things and some other things that we have not considered. The point of it all is that the attackers for Olympic Games had a reliable way to put malcode into the Natanz facility to do recon and to do the delay and degrade operation, and it was timely and fast. They had a way to do it. It was reliable. In other words, it had a reliable delivery mechanism. So the question that comes up now is, what is the legal authority for the U.S. government to do what they did? Okay, at some point in the early research into this, the Stuxnet stuff was over on the military channels, but somewhere in the time frame, President Bush moved it over to the intelligence channels, and the reason is the thought process here is that President Bush had his lawyers spending as much time on the legal authority to do this kind of operation as he did on the engineers designing the actual malcode. Okay, and the question is, okay, who has the authority to deploy this kind of code when we're not at war with anybody? So if you look at the law of the U.S., Title 10 of the United States Code defines warfare operations. Title 50 of the United States Code talks about covert operations. Okay, and here we are talking about destroying critical infrastructure in a country that we were not at war with. So Title 10 of the U.S. Code probably does not apply here, but it does apply to the spies. The spies are authorized to do this kind of thing. It's the same authority that President Obama's used to do the drone attacks and to kill Osama bin Laden. That in Title 50, there are certain things he has leeway to do that the Title 10 authority does not allow them to do. Right, so the way this happens is under a presidential finding. He writes down what he needs to do. He has to inform the appropriate intelligence committees about what he intends to do, and these things describe influence actions against political, economic, or military objectives. So somewhere in this place, they move the authority from the military channels over to the intelligence channels to keep the entire thing legal. And then fast forward to when President Obama takes power in 20 January of 2009, he has to review all the presidential findings that President Bush had in play as he goes out the door and decide whether or not he's going to keep them or to terminate them. And he decides that he is going to keep Operation Olympic Games going forward. So during this time frame of President Obama, 1,000 centrifuges were dismantled, okay? Presumably because of the Stuxnet attacks going on at Natanz, going after the centrifuges. And at this point, we need to talk about the sophistication of Stuxnet. And I hate using the term sophistication because no one really knows what that means. But when I say sophistication, I really mean advanced, okay? Because this is not the average piece of malcode. There was advanced planning and execution going on over years in order before they actually did any delivery and to accomplish their goals. And this is the time frame here that we started as far back as 2005 and all the way up through the discovery in the summer of 2010. And as I said, okay, there's lots of research going on about P1, the vulnerabilities of P1 centrifuges, probably from the Idaho National Lab, probably from Oak Ridge Laboratory, and others that we do not know, or even in the Negev Desert from the Israeli side. And it costs a lot of money to develop this kind of stuff. And developing code to do this is not cheap. Okay, this particular Stuxnet, depending on how you count it, had 4 zero-day exploits in it. In today's prices, a zero-day exploit goes between $5,000 and $250,000 each, depending on how sexy each exploit is. Okay, so that puts the Olympic Games price range between $20 and $1 million just for the zero-day exploits. And that does not include the cost of the beacon okay, and any of the delay and degrade operations. That was just the zero-day exploits they used to take control of the centrifuges. So it was a pretty expensive operation just at the get-go. And it used new technology, okay? Back then, we're looking at Windows Vista, introduced a new technology called driver signing. So that the idea was that if you had a new driver on your computer that would say install your printer, that the manufacturer would sign that driver so that we would know who the author was, and that no bad guy could slip in a driver that would be malicious that you wouldn't know about. Well, that's interesting because the bad guys in this case stole certificates from a company called Realtek and a company from J Micron and inserted them and changed them and added them to Stuxnet. So when Stuxnet ran, it looked like it was being run from Realtek or J Micron. And if you want to put your tinfoil hat on and be a conspiracy nut on this and look where those two companies operate in the world, this is Innovation Road in Hsinchu Science Park in Hsinchu, Taiwan. Both these companies' headquarters are within a block of each other, okay, on that road. It would be in intelligence sources that iDefense have mentioned know that lots of different spy agencies hang out on Innovation Road because there's lots of interesting things going on there that lots of different countries need to know about. So if I was going to steal certificates from a science company, that might be a good place where I would go. So put your tinfoil hats on because that's my conspiracy theory for the day. So the other thing is that it makes this an advanced piece of code is that it was targeted SCADA. We had not seen SCADA targeted in any way before this attack. There's lots of theories that it could be done, but we never had seen it done in the wild before. In fact, it was so targeted, it was looking for two specific centrifuges, the motors running those centrifuges, one built by an Iranian company called Ferraro Apaya, and another one built by a Finnish company called Bacon. If Stuxnet got to a machine and it was not running one of those two motors, then it just sat idle and didn't do anything. But if it did find it, okay, that's when it would go to the next stage and cause the delay and degrade operation. Now these centrifuges, they run at between 807 hertz and 1210 hertz. That's really, really fast. It takes weeks to spin the uranium, the gas uranium, to get the enrichment piece of it out. And what Stuxnet did was they would mess with the process to try to make the batches in the system go south before they were able to cull it and make it useful. So the first thing it would do is reach in and make the centrifuge spin way past its normal operating speeds, as high as 1400 hertz, well past the top level speed it's supposed to go, and it would run it at that speed for about 30 minutes, and then it would stop doing what it was doing and let it sit for a little bit. Okay, and it might sit for a month doing it that way. And then it would come after it and then lower the resolution of the revolution speed down to the lowest it could possibly go, down to 2 hertz, and let that happen for about 30 minutes and let it sit there and then do nothing to it for another month. And it goes back and forth and back and forth. And because these centrifuges are highly precise engines, kind of messing with the rotor speeds like that would cause them to fail all the time. All right, and the technicians at Natanz, these things were kind of spooky anyway. They were kind of fail on their own anyway, and having more of these failures happen was just kind of a normal thing to them. They didn't notice that a piece of malcode was in there doing anything to their operation. So this is what caused the delay in degrade operation. Weeks would go by before they would know that their batch of enriched uranium was bad and then have to start all over again. So the precision, obviously the centrifuges report back to the Siemens or the analysts at Natanz, and so they should have noticed this, right? They should have noticed the speeds changing. But the other great thing that this piece of malcode did was Stuxnet got in the middle of that. When the centrifuges reported back to, hey, I'm not spinning correctly, Stuxnet would intercept that communication and report back to the technicians that everything was A-OK, so the technicians never knew that it was out of alignment at any time. That's pretty awesome. Okay, so like I said before, these P1 centrifuges are kind of spooky anyway. They would fail, but not uniformly, so any any more failures going on in the network, they wouldn't notice per se. And in the time frame of the attacks, 1,000 centrifuges were dismantled because of failure, okay, and presumably because of the Stuxnet success. Okay, and so at the end of the run, when Virus Blockade found them, you get the time frame for these specific attacks. And then this is where the mistake was made. We decided that we were going to swing for the fences. The NSA was in charge on one side, the U.S. side of the operation. Unit 8200 on the Israeli side. Unit 8200 is the Israeli NSA. Okay, they were doing more recon inside the Natanz power plant and found another 1,000 centrifuges that were ripe for attack, and they decided to go for it. Okay, they had two waves of attacks. The second wave happened in March 2010, and the third wave happened in April 2010. But during that time frame, half of all the 9,000 centrifuges at Natanz was idle. So they had some success when they swung for the fences here. But that's when the error happened. Stuxnet escaped from Natanz. Something changed when they went for the fences, when they tried quickly to go after those another segment of the network to get those additional 1,000 centrifuges. It's not quite sure how it got out, but probably the controls that were in place that would prevent it from leaving the Natanz network were somehow modified or changed or whatever. One thought is that when let's say you believe the Siemens contractors were compromised, that they would take their laptops inside the Natanz power plant with an infected machine. Okay, if it was connected to the Natanz power plate looking for those engines, Stuxnet would expand. But if it got outside to the internet and didn't find those engines, then it shouldn't try to percolate itself. Well, somehow it did, and that's how it got into the wild. And that's when Virus Blockada found it in the summer of 2010. The other interesting thing was that it is really the first time we've seen a cyber skirmish, where bad guys and good guys went after each other in a very realistic time frame, where one guy did one thing and another guy did another. So this is how it went down. Virus Blockada announces to the world that Stuxnet is in the wild. Okay, we've discovered that the Realtek was used. The Realtek certificate was used to sign Stuxnet, so nobody would notice it. So this is the real punch-counterpunch I was talking about. VeriSign cancels that certificate, so that certificate is no longer valid. On that same day, in two big SCADA forums, the two places where all the SCADA geeks go to talk about SCADA kinds of stuff, two denial of service attacks were launched against those two forums, almost as if the bad guys didn't want any of those experts talking about SCADA systems while they did their magic. Okay, and the next day after those denial of service attacks, the operators on Stuxnet installed a second certificate in Stuxnet, this time from J Micron. But we were on to them, and VeriSign noticed it a little bit of time later and revoked those certificates too. But whatever they did in those couple of days was able to get done because no one noticed it at that point. So that is what I'm calling the battle for the driver certificates. It is a skirmish. It is a denial of service attack. It is a punch-counterpunch between the good guys and the bad guys in this attack. So later in the fall of 2010, Hamid Alipur, this guy's picture, he's the IT director for Iran, said 30,000 Iranian computers were infected with Stuxnet at this point. Half of all the 9,000 centrifuges in Natanz are offline. Right, and this is when it gets very interesting. At the end, or the fall of 2010, presumably the technicians at Natanz have figured out how to eradicate Stuxnet off their network, and they shut the plant down for a number of days, presumably to eradicate that malcode off their systems. 6 days later, they turn it back on. Presumably now Stuxnet is off their systems, and Stuxnet is no longer able to cause any delay and degrade operations inside Natanz. Okay, so we're going to presume at this point that Stuxnet is gone. So this is when it changes. The mission still holds that the people behind the Olympic Games want to stop Iran from building a nuclear bomb. If Stuxnet is no longer in the plant, what else can be done? Right? We're still looking for that middle ground option, and Stuxnet is no longer functioning. Now we're back to warfare or other kinds of things. Well, here's what's done. 9 days later, after Stuxnet is eradicated from the Natanz power plant, these two Iranian physicists, leaders of the Natanz leaders of the Iranian nuclear program, are driving to work in Tehran independently. Two motorcycle guys come up on each of them, attach bombs to their car, throws a bomb in an open window in Abbasi's car, it attaches a bomb to Shadari's car and blows those guys up. Okay, Shadari is dead. Okay, he's assassinated. The other guy is in critical condition. Like I said, right out of a Jason Bourne novel. Right, and it's not the only time. And Israel has been blamed for this. It's all speculation, but it has kind of been their modus operandi. U.S. denied all involvement in the assassination attempts and assassinations, but it's interesting to see how that happened. And it's not the only time it has happened. There's been many assassinations, okay, associated with Iranian nuclear physicists over time, right? And the lesson to learn here, if you're an Iranian nuclear scientist and you're driving home from your office in Natanz and you see a motorcycle coming up from behind you, I would get out of your car and run as fast as you can because there's a chance they're coming to blow you up. So the Olympic Games campaign plan, when you put it on a timeline, is very interesting. Okay, so the planning begins before 2008. We're seeing flame as the beacon development of that happening. We see the first strike of Stuxnet in 2009, the second and third strikes into 2010. Around that time frame is when 1,000 centrifuges were destroyed. Okay, a total at the end was 4,000 of the 9,000 centrifuges were offline. But it becomes public that it's happening in the summer of 2010, and that is where the skirmish of the certificates happens. The Realtek certificate is revoked, the J Micron certificate is installed, J Micron certificate is revoked, and then the DDoS attacks on the SCADA farms all happening in a punch-counterpunch that we had not seen before. Okay, and finally Natanz is taken offline to eradicate Stuxnet and put back online, and then that's when the two Iranian scientists were assassinated or wounded. In the end, okay, both Secretary of State at the time, Hillary Clinton, and Meir Dagan, who was one of the intelligence directors in Israel, said the nuclear program was delayed until 2015 because of Operation Olympic Games. They didn't say Operation Olympic Games, but they said operations. But there are differing opinion. These guys, the Institute for Science and International Security, said the Stuxnet operation had no effect, that the technicians at Natanz were able to keep producing enriched uranium at a higher rate for the functioning centrifuges, and the attacks on and dismantling of the other centrifuges had no effect at all on the operation. And then we have what Prime Minister Netanyahu said at the UN in 2012, that the Iranians were very, very close to having nuclear power or nuclear bomb capability. So in conclusion, what we're talking about here is that this is a new U.S. foreign policy, and that's really what David Sanger's book was about. General Hayden, who was the Director of National Intelligence during the time, says we have crossed the Rubicon. The fact that we as a country have allowed a cyber attack to go delay, integrate, and destroy critical infrastructure in a country that we're not at war with is really a new thing, and that we have not seen the ramifications of that before, and there's no way to put that genie back in the bottle, to cross my metaphors. This is really what cyber warfare is. It is not cyber espionage, cyber crime, or cyber hacktivism. It is really destroying critical infrastructure. All right, and if you want a definition of what cyber warfare is, it's very precise. It involves one or more nation states destroying each other's national treasure to achieve some purpose, and is exactly what we see here in this case. So at the end, half of 9,000 centrifuges were idle. It is definitely a cyber warfare campaign against Iran, and now it's just a matter of time before other nations put that little arrow out of their quiver and use it against us or some of our allies. David Sanger's book is called Confront and Conceal. It's a fascinating review of the political implications of using cyber warfare. Belongs in the cybersecurity canon, and that is the end of my presentation.